Welcome to monobiology. Today we're going to look at the synapse, which is a very integral part of the nervous system. And just to show you a little idea here, we've already talked a little bit about the neuron. We know the different parts of the neuron. So remember, these are the dendrites here. This is the nucleus. This is the cell body. And this guy here is the axon. And these are the axon terminals. So the synapse would quite literally be the space here, the junction or the gap that is between two neurons or a neuron and some sort of effector cell, let's say a muscle cell, okay, or some other type of cell. Could be a pituitary cell or something like that, okay? So the synapse is what allows a neuron to communicate with other cells. Very important. Okay, so how does it work is the main question here. So remember that a synapse is a gap or a junction between two neurons or a neuron and some other type of target cell like a muscle cell. Okay, and what we're going to look at is quite simply how the signal gets passed from one neuron to another or from one neuron to another type of cell. Okay, and that's what we're going to look at here. This is the same picture that's in your workbook, so as we go through, you can identify or you can take notes on the different parts of the things that I'm going to tell you. Okay? So, if I was to blow up this area right here, or this one, or this one, or this one, or this one, it would look like this. Okay? So this is one of these little axon terminals, one of these little ends of these branches here, magnified significantly. Okay? This little arrow here represents the direction of the signal. And quite literally, the signal will be traveling, as you recall, along the axon in this direction. Okay, it's going to have to jump from this one to this one, and then it doesn't actually jump, but it's going to have to get from there to there, and then the signal will continue down. Remember, a signal always goes from dendrites to axon, dendrites to axon. That's how it moves. Okay, so what this picture is showing us is that the signal is moving in this direction. This right here is the axon terminal, and this area right here in between the two is the synapse, the gap between the two. Okay, so that's the signal coming down, that's the synapse. You can label those. Now these here, you probably recognize them, but maybe you don't. They're mitochondria. Okay, and remember, mitochondria are usually around when cellular respiration is required, and cellular respiration is required when we need ATP, or cellular energy. Now, once you see what's going to happen here, you'll realize quite quickly that obviously this is going to take energy, and which is why those mitochondria are there. So, let's have a look. Here's what happens. Step 1, the signal reaches the axon terminal. That's step 1. Signal reaches the axon terminal. Step 2, the presynaptic, this would be the presynaptic area. This would be the postsynaptic area. Let's get a different color here. Okay, so this would be the presynaptic area. Oops. This would be the I must have picked a color that doesn't work. This would be the presynaptic area, and this would be the postsynaptic area. Okay? All right. Continue. Once the signal reaches the presynaptic terminal, the vesicles, as you can see here, and these are tiny vesicles, presynaptic vesicles, that are filled, as you can see, this is a blown up version, that are filled with neurotransmitters. Okay, so let's pick a different color. This is a presynaptic vesicle, and see these little circles? Those are neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. Okay, so step 1, signal reaches the axon terminal. Step 2, the presynaptic vesicles begin to migrate towards the synapse. Okay, so all these little dots will move and fuse right here, just like this. Okay, so step 2, presynaptic vesicles move towards the synapse. Step 3, they fuse with the synapse. They fuse with the presynaptic membrane right here. This is what happens. They fuse with the presynaptic membrane. Step 4, they release their neurotransmitters. That would be step 4. They release their neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters travel across the synapse. This is step 5. The neurotransmitters travel across the synapse and bind to receptors. And those receptors are located on the postsynaptic membrane, which is this area right here. Postsynaptic membrane, neurotransmitters, binding to receptors. Now, this is the cool part. Step 6. Once those neurotransmitters bind to the postsynaptic membrane, it causes the cell signal to be sent. Okay, so whatever that is, if this is another neuron like we have here, if this is another neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, then that neuron will begin an action potential. It will become depolarized, and the signal will travel along the entire length, just like we talked about before. If it's a muscle cell, guess what? That muscle cell will also depolarize and it will contract. Okay? So depending on what type of cell it is, that's what's going to happen. It's going to depolarize. It's going to cause some sort of change in that postsynaptic cell communication. Now, the last step. See all these neurotransmitters that are bound to that? Well, think about it. If those neurotransmitters stayed attached to those receptors, then no other signal could be sent. Like, they're blocked, right? The next time a signal would come down here, nothing would happen. It would travel down here, but it couldn't travel through here because these receptors would be blocked. So, step 7 has to be to dismantle this connection. Okay, so what's going to happen is that enzymes are going to break apart the neurotransmitters so that further signals can be passed on. And then, of course, the neurotransmitters are going to be reabsorbed by the presynaptic membrane. Presynaptic, postsynaptic, before, after synapse. Okay, so step 7, enzymes will break apart or cleave the neurotransmitters, and the presynaptic cell neuron will reabsorb them, okay, through active transport. I guess I really didn't need this page. Anyway, just to summarize, there are 7 steps. If you need to go back and write those steps down, you should do it. If you need to go back and finish it, go ahead. That, in a nutshell, is how a signal gets from one neuron to another, or from one neuron to another cell. Doesn't matter what type of cell it is. Usually it's neurons or muscle cells. Effector cells, we call them. Very important process, another type of cell signaling. And if you have any questions, please feel free to bring them to class. But that, in a nutshell, is how a synapse works.